A very warm good evening to all of you who have joined us. We're very excited to have Mr. Aayush Mallik and Ms. Anna Thomas with us to discuss the LAMP Fellowship. They'll also be providing some tips on the best approaches for the same. We're already well aware of their professional achievements, so I don't think there's need for any introduction on that. But still, Ms. Aayush Mallik is now working as a law clerk at the Supreme Court of India, and Ms. Anna Thomas is pursuing her education in international relations at the Graduate Institute of Geneva. I also want to emphasize that if the attendees have any questions, they can just use the Q&A box and post the questions in the same. We wish that this panel is as useful and as productive as we want it to be. But Aayush and Anna, you can begin now.
Okay. So hi everyone. It's great to be back at NALSAR virtually, if not physically. Thank you to the Public Policy Collective for setting this up, and thank you to all of you for turning up on a long weekend. And yeah, I know from sort of personal experience how during a long weekend it's very hard to get anybody to sort of attend a NALSAR event. And I guess when it comes to like it being virtual, it becomes a lot easier. You can attend if you want to. There's no coercive element where the organizers are pushing people in. So I'm sort of hoping that everybody who's here is here because they want to be here. And so we're going to be talking about the LAMP Fellowship, and Aayush has made a presentation that I'm going to share and sort of riff off of. We also got a long list of questions from Utkarsh, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to sort of incorporate all of those questions into our presentation, and if we miss something out, we'll sort of address them towards the end, and we can address all of your questions as well at the end of our presentation. So I'm just going to share 1 second. Okay, so you can see this, right? So yeah, so we're going to be talking about the LAMP Fellowship. Both of us graduated from NALSAR in 2018. Both of us did a stint at a law firm for 1 year and then did the LAMP Fellowship. We were the lucky people who sort of finished the fellowship right around the time when COVID started. So we got to actually experience the whole thing, the whole of the fellowship, while I would say the people who just finished the fellowship this year, the ones that just finished in March, had a much more difficult time, and I will sort of address that in a bit. So just what is the LAMP Fellowship? It's about assisting a member of parliament with legislative work. And as Aayush will tell you in a bit, it's not just legislative work that you will end up doing. It is something that it's definitely part and a great aspect of the work that you're doing, but there is a lot more to the LAMP Fellowship than just the legislative work. This is something that is organized by PRS Legislative Research. So they are an NGO that takes does the application process, filters people out, and selects a few people to work with an MP. They're also the ones who are paying you. So they will be paying you about 20,000 rupees per month, and that's the stipend you will get for the duration of your fellowship. The fellowship is for an approximate duration of 10 months. You're expected to be working with an MP through 3 parliamentary sessions. So it will start with the monsoon session. You will be there for the winter session as well as the budget session. And usually the last day of the budget session is going to be the last day of your fellowship as well. Now, the strength of the cohort, so there are about 50 to 60 people who get selected for the fellowship each year. And I think during our year, it was about 51 people. With the subsequent batch, it was about 52, 53, if I'm not wrong. And they keep sort of expanding that. So they started with only about 15 people, and now they're expanding because there's a lot more demand among MPs for fellows, as well as a lot more fellows who want to work with MPs. And now just to sort of discuss like the number of applications that come in, it's gradually been increasing over the past few years. So you will see, for instance, for us, I think we had about 2,000 applications that came in, and 50 people got selected. The subsequent batch, it was about 2,500, if I'm not wrong. And with this batch, the batch that's incoming right now, they actually saw about 6,000 applications. And I think that's a product of the anxiety about jobs with COVID and stuff. So I don't know if it's going to continue with such a large number of applications, but that's the number you're seeing. So the application to fellowship conversion ratio would be, I don't know, like between 0.8 and 2.5%. That's where it stands at this point of time. This is a full-time commitment, and this is something that PRS is very particular about. You're not supposed to be taking on other responsibilities. You can't take on a second job. You can't consider this to be just an internship. There are times when people have definitely taken on additional responsibilities, but I would say that PRS is very particular about you getting their consent when it comes to this, as well as getting the MP that you work with, their consent as well when you do this. Again, this is for graduates. So people who finished their undergraduate degree or their master's degree are eligible to apply. There is an age limit of 25. There's also a requirement that you have to be an Indian citizen. You can't be a person of Indian origin. That's not enough. You have to be a citizen. Again, I don't know how like you prove citizenship. That's not something that PRS has ever actually dealt with, but I guess the general idea is, you've spent a significant period of your education, your schooling in India, I suppose. I'm not sure, but anyway, that's what their requirement is. Now, just to talk about like who you get allocated, you can get allocated MPs from the Lok Sabha as well as the Rajya Sabha. And again, Treasury as well as opposition benches. So you have a wide range of members of parliament representing different parties who PRS has chosen for their fellows. So you can be, and PRS makes that decision. PRS is the one who allocates you to an MP. You don't get to choose in any way who your MP will be. So so the parties can be, the BJP, it can be the Indian National Congress, it can be the Nationalist Congress Party, it can be regional parties, it can be the AIADMK, the Shiv Sena, the DMK, the Trinamool. So it's a wide range of parties, and you could be allocated to any one of them. And again, Treasury as well as opposition benches. So on either side of the spectrum, but of course, they're very clear that you are doing only legislative work. So you will not get allocated an MP who also occupies a position as a cabinet minister. That's just not going to happen. You will definitely only get MPs whose responsibility is limited to that of being an MP. Now, what this means is that each fellow will experience this program differently. And what by that I mean that there is no system in place when it comes to all of how members of parliament function. So that will mean that you might end up with an MP who has a large office with a large number of staff, which means your work is limited to exactly what you need to do, which is legislative work. But on the other hand, you might get allocated someone for whom you will be the only resource person in Delhi, which means you will be doing a lot apart from your legislative work. You will be coordinating their itinerary. You will be figuring out really just the basics of how they move through their life in Delhi. So in that sense, you will see that, one aspect of that is what sort of role your MP plays within their party, within parliament. So if they have a leadership position in parliament, that will mean that you have to do a lot of research on everything that happens in parliament. This will be the bills that are being discussed. This will be matters of urgent public importance. It will be the various kinds of discussions that happen in parliament. But there are smaller MPs who do not have such a significant role in parliament. So that will mean that your work gets redirected elsewhere. You will be writing speeches for them for conferences they're attending. You will be figuring out things for them to do for their constituency using their MP Lads funds, which incidentally has been blocked during COVID, but I don't know if it's going to start up again at a later point. You might also just be writing, op-eds for the MP on behalf of the MP to be published in papers. And again, sort of tying this back to the full-time commitment aspect, you are your MP's resource, and that's your identity for the whole of the year, which means that there is a sort of requirement that you don't publish, again, in your own name, without the consent of your MP or PRS for that matter. Now, I feel like I should probably tell this. I spoke about like how many applications are usually made. Now, PRS is very aware that that there needs to be some level of diversity that is met. So when you look at my cohort, for instance, you will find people from different backgrounds. So you will see a lot of, and it is true that there is a significant number of law people. So people from law law universities, all of the different law universities. So I think we had like a 15 to 20% law proportion when it came to our cohort, but it's not just law people. So you will find people who did engineering, people who studied psychology, econ, and yeah, so it's very diverse in that sense. You will also see that it's very diverse in terms of political beliefs. It's very diverse in terms of where people come from. They come from all parts of India, not just from the cities, from the small towns as well. And of course, the fact is they still only pay you about 20,000 rupees per month, which means that if you're an outsider to Delhi, there's a significant amount of cost that you incur to be a part of this fellowship, which you will also see in terms of the proportion of people who are taking up the fellowship at the end of the day. So you will see a lot of people who are based in Delhi, or just finish their degree at Delhi University, and so it's just easy for them to make that transition. But nevertheless, I do believe that at some level, apart from your basic requirements in terms of your application, there is a diversity check that PRS also conducts. Having said that, I should probably also say that the fellowship is not your only way to work with an MP. You can work with if you have the connections, if you have the access, you can just apply to any MP that you want and find a way to work with them. And this can honestly be a much more feasible option because you can actually choose who you're working with. So, that's great. You can also possibly negotiate your salary and get better terms from the MP that you're dealing with, as opposed to what PRS gives you, which is a standard, 20,000 rupees per month. Apart from that, also, I think with some MPs, they might probably give more credence to the research that you are doing over that of a fellows, given that they're actually paying for your research as opposed to somebody else who's funding that research aspect. So if you have the access, then of course there's nothing that stops you from doing this outside of the LAMP fellowship. The LAMP fellowship is meant to provide access, given how most of us don't have the sort of connections to get to a member of parliament, to work with a member of parliament. And that is what PRS is sort of attempting to do with the fellowship. What else? I'll move on to the next slide, which is the timeline and the applications. So yes, the selection process starts in December, Jan. I think they usually close applications around Jan 25th, 26th. And what is your application? It consists of your CV, your policy essay, and your statement of purpose. In March, you'll have interviews for shortlisted candidates, and towards April is when you get to know if you've been selected for the fellowship. And as far as I know, the results for the incoming cohort was announced yesterday. So around April 1st, April 2nd is usually when they announce the results of the fellowship. Now, to address some of the questions on the application, I'm going to tie up the CV and the statement of purpose together here. So, and just talk from what I know of the whole application process. When you're talking about the statement of purpose, I think what PRS is looking for are two things. One is your interest in public policy, and two is your interest in politics. So the whole CV, statement of purpose bit, is about how effectively you can address these requirements that PRS is looking for. So for me, I think I'd done a few public policy internships. So that was what I sort of emphasized when it came to my statement of purpose. And similarly, that was also stuff that was there in my CV. I would say that I don't really think that your CGPA really matters when it comes to this process. I really don't think it does. But it is what you've done while you were at university or after university that matters. So, there was a question about what you can do if you've not done a public policy internship or a policy internship of any kind. I think that's fine, because as law students, we do engage with policy a lot more than perhaps some other fields, some other professional fields. So, I mean, if you've done only corporate internships, find what it is in that corporate internship that might have that policy angle, right? Like if there's an FTI policy that you analyzed, that works. That is public policy. That is something that you can talk about. Or if you've discussed disinvestment policies, or something that you've done in your internship that you can tie back to uh, uh, some policy issue, can probably be something that you can use to sort of promote your interest in public policy. And of course, we're all political people. You can talk about anything when it comes to politics, and how you've been interested in the movement of, I don't know, Indian politics. That's all stuff you can say. Now, even if you've not done corporate internships, I think litigation internships as well, they offer that same sort of perspective on a lot of the concerns that people are grappling with at this point of time. So I don't know, just how over-flooded the courts are, the issues with public interest litigation. It's all stuff that you can discuss and bring out a policy angle to it. And outside of internships, of course, you can, talk about stuff you've done in college. So it can be the papers you've published, the conferences you might have attended. Uh, it can even just be a class. I mean, if you've taken an elective that had a strong focus that was not, very law-based, but also a little bit about like stuff that's happening around you and how to like improve situations, I guess you could just include that as something that sort of triggered that interest. So I guess you could just, it's at the end of the day, the CV and the statement of purpose is about how well you can market yourself in and fit a certain agenda. So there is really nothing that's out of bounds. There's nothing that you can't sort of fit into that framework if you try, I would say. So and if you haven't done any of these things, personally I would just say that law school is 5 years, and in 5 years you have like 2 months of vacation between 4 months of classes. So that's a lot of time to like do something. And but I mean, your fourth and fifth years are relatively chill, so there's nothing that stops you from populating that CV in some way if you want to. So I would say that's how you would address the CV and the statement of purpose. Now, when it comes to the policy essay, what PRS says is that you need to analyze a law or a policy, but they're very flexible with that definition. So, you don't have to take your, Article 13 definition of what a law is. You can be a lot more expansive when it comes to how you define a law. So they're completely okay with you analyzing a bill that hasn't yet become a law, but you can still do that for the purpose of the application. Apart from laws, I know people have done a lot of really not specifically policy or law things. So I know that somebody from my batch, for instance, analyzed the concept of the universal basic income, and then they sort of tied it down to some pilot schemes that were being launched in some states at that point of time. Similarly, somebody else I know worked on wrote an essay on the India Post Payments Bank, which is not a law or a policy. I would categorize it as more of an institution, but that was fine for PRS's purposes. So I feel like as long as you can sort of tie that policy, tie whatever you're talking about down to something concrete in terms of a document, maybe an official document, a Law Commission of India report, a notification that was released by the government. I think that would work quite well for the purpose of the essay. I just one word of caution that I would provide when you're choosing an essay topic is that you probably ideally shouldn't enter a very niche space. So I would say, if you're taking something which requires highly specialized knowledge, don't take up something, like, I don't know, transfer pricing and taxation issues, because at the first level, you must realize that the people who are going to be vetting your documents are going to be current LAMP fellows. So if they can't sort of process what you've been saying, then it's quite likely that they might not consider you very high up when it comes to your application. Similarly, there are multiple levels of vetting that takes place here. So you don't want to be in a situation where you've been shortlisted for an interview, and then the panelist who is interviewing you does not really know much about your subject, so doesn't really have any significant question to ask you, or cannot understand your response when they ask you a question. So I would say try to not be very niche. Try to bring yourself down to a certain level of common understanding for the purpose of the essay. Once you get shortlisted for the interview, now it's a very long list of shortlisted candidates for the interview. So your interview is usually going to be just about like 5 or 7 minutes long. It's not going to take a lot of time. Expect to be quizzed about your policy essay. Expect that they will ask you questions, not just about your essay, but also about like stuff surrounding your essay. So for instance, what I had done my essay on was just a government notification that empowered a bunch of ministries to conduct surveillance. So they didn't just ask me about my government notification, they also asked me about what I thought about the Personal Data Protection Bill. So so definitely research around your policy essay, what other related subjects might be there. Apart from your essay, be sure to be asked questions that are more general in nature, general knowledge questions like, where are state elections taking place this year? Name, I don't know, 5 regional parties that you know, which MPs you might want to work under. I don't know, 5 good policies of the Modi government, 5 bad policies of the Modi government. Yeah, so I mean, general knowledge is also something that they just want to know how interested you are actually in politics. You can also expect to be ragged a bit, because that normally happens in most interviews. So there are people who ask you questions like, what if you and your MP's political ideologies don't align? So try to find a way to sort of answer that question. That you can be asked, do you think you can sort of function in New Delhi without knowing Hindi? And again, try to find a way to navigate that question. So this is just a general overview of the sort of questions that are asked during the interview. But yeah, so just be prepared for a little bit of general knowledge, be very aware of what you've said in your policy essay, and of course, be prepared for a couple of random questions as well. So I've very quickly gone through the fellowship, how it happens. So mid-June to mid-July is training. You have to be there for the 3 parliament sessions that take place in 1 year. So and yeah, I think that's about it for this section. I saw a question asking if PRS offers internships. Yes, they do. But of course, during an internship, it is just an internship that PRS is offering. So you will be doing the things that PRS does and not what LAMP fellows do. LAMP fellows work with their MP, because the MP is the priority here. with PRS. PRS does a lot of work where they're doing uh, research and analysis on legislations that have come up, the effect of legislations that have already been passed, a lot of the background work on the things that the parliament is doing. So that's the sort of work you would end up doing while you were interning at PRS. And it's very, very different experience from that of the LAMP fellowship. Over to you, Ayush, for the rest.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks to the Public Policy Group as well. Uh, as Anna said, it's really nice to be back. I just also like first thing that I wanted to flag at the very beginning is that the presentation that you see on your screen is something that I prepared for a webinar that happened in November. So which is why Anna's name is missing. I didn't do that intentionally. All right, I just wanted to pick a few things from what Anna said and just fill in something from that I noticed in my experience. When you're talking about your SOP, when you're talking about the essay where you're talking about why you should get into the fellowship, one critical point that your evaluators will be looking for is what is it that you bring to the table. So you can talk about the qualities that you have, but try not to make it too generic because almost everyone wants to say that they are hardworking. Everyone wants to say they are dedicated. Probably look for things that are more that catch people's attention and things that are actually required in a fellow. So something like attention to detail. These are the things that your evaluators might keep an eye out while you're writing that SOP. There were questions about the CV, and as far as the CVs are concerned, they are not so important in the process where you're writing your SOPs and your policy essay. That is just the screening process. CVs become more important when you go for the interview because that's the time when people sitting across you, they have everything that you have presented right in front of them, and they'll be picking their questions from there. And you also need to understand that most of the people who are applying for this program have just graduated in 3 years. So 3 years is a relatively lesser time to fit in a lot of things, especially if you're not in a semester-based system. So we lawyers, of course, have an advantage there because we have already done a fair number of internships. And even if you do not have any particular policy internships as such, as was the case with me, because when you enter law school, you hear a lot of things. The first thing that comes to your mind is that the fee is so high, eventually I should land up in a well-paying job. That is true, which is why a lot of people try to do litigation and corporate, and policy is something that generally stays on the sideline. So, but then it's not that the rest of the people who come there, they also come with extensive experience. So just be sure that whatever you are presenting in your interview is something that you know thoroughly. So when I went for my interview, I was working in the insolvency team of a firm, and a lot of my questions were targeted around insolvency, the amendments that were brought in, the bankruptcy law reforms committee, etc. Another thing about interviews is that it is always good to be aware of a large number of things. If you know something is happening, and if you don't have the time right now to go and research on it, just note it down on your phone, and a few days before the interview, brush up on all of that. This is something that really helped me because there were questions that I had thought of just the day before the interview, and they were one of the some of the core questions that were asked to me. Uh, then there are, of course, other skills like leading. So in the interview, you should also be able to lead your interviewers to ask you a certain question, dropping some words, um, making logical leaps. These are simply things that you attempt in any of the interviews. I think even in day zero interviews, people do make use of these tactics. So if you are good at this, well and fine. Um, as far as your policy essay is concerned, something that we noticed last year was that the essays that come in, a large number of essays are concentrated on a few topics that everyone is talking about. For instance, last year it was, say, the National Education Policy or the Transgender Act. I would suggest that you could also try to step out of the conventional ideas, things that everyone is talking about, because that really gets your interviewer interested. But then again, as Anna said, it shouldn't be hyper technical so as to keep your interviewer as well as your evaluator absolutely clueless about what you're saying. So the topic of my essay was national nutrition policy, which very few people know about, but the way it ties up with your minimum wage policy, minimum wage law, or the price guarantee for crops, these are things that really catch on to the interviewer to ask questions. So yeah, that's it. Now I will just talk about what a fellow does during the fellowship. So there are basically three things that any parliamentarian does within the parliament. One is the legislative work, second is an oversight on the executive, and thirdly, anything that relates to government finances. When it comes to the legislative portion, there are two channels in which it can go. Firstly, there is introduction of bills in the parliament, and then the parliamentarians they debate on it, and then all the parties will vote. So in this process, when the debates are happening, uh, this is the third box that I've put in here. So when the debates are happening, the points that your MP raises, you will play a very critical role in doing that research. And this is a place where you have a lot of scope for creativity. For instance, if your MP is, say, the 15th person in the sequence to speak, most of the things that you see in editorials about a certain bill, they would have been brought up by the other parliamentarians already. So there's no point of repeating. A lot of innovation will come in here where you decide what are the things that you pick up from newspapers, from reports, what are the different perspectives you bring in. And that is a point where law students especially find it slightly difficult because they have to step out of that boundary. I was working with an MP who was the single member. He was one of the two members from his party, and he was always much later in the sequence, and he always used to get just 3 to 4 minutes to speak. So to stuff in a lot of knowledge which has not been brought out earlier was quite a task. As the first slide indicated that every fellow's experience is going to be different, that's exactly what you realize over the course of time uh, through the research that you're doing. Besides that, there is a session, there's a 1 hour period dedicated in both the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha for questions that MPs can ask to the ministers. There are specific days allotted for each of the ministries, finance, fisheries, agriculture, etc. Your task would be to draft those questions. How you do it is something that PRS trains you holistically before you start the fellowship. So drafting questions, being innovative there, seeing how you use your language to pick out information that is not already in the public domain will be quite critical. And we have realized that these questions that are brought up in the question are become equally important because a lot of conversations that happen around are really shaped by this. So something that we have heard of is that the controversy around the Rafale deal was something that was uncovered by one of the questions that was asked in the parliament. When we were working, then one of our colleagues had drafted a question on SC/ST representation in the faculty of IITs and IIMs. And immediately after that, that was caught up by the newspapers, and there was a whole discussion about how we can improve that representation. Going back to the legislative portion, there are also many committees. There are parliamentary committees from both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha that your MP will be a part of. And that's one place where you'll be able to do in-depth work on the functioning of different departments, functioning of different ministries, the amount of money they are picking up from the coffers, how much they are spending, how they are spending, what is the success of different schemes, if a bill has been proposed and it has been tabled before the committee, then you do an in-depth research into how that bill is going to function, what are the pros and cons. So that is one more space for you to be working with the MP. Besides that, there will be general discussions within the parliament uh, in terms of the things that are happening in the constituency of your MP or things of usual public importance, something as generic as India falling down in the various rankings, or something as specific as a certain incident that happens in a particular university, for instance. Outside of the sessions, you will also be working, outside of the parliamentary work, you will also have the chance of working on a lot of press briefs. Your MPs will be invited to several interviews on news channels where a certain topic will be given. So you'll have to just research and give them the material so that they are able to speak. You'll be writing articles with them, for them. You might also get the chance of handling their social media accounts. In totality, it is a very wide range of things that you can do, but it also depends on the MP that you're working with. So I know of people who did not work on the bills specifically, who did all the other parliamentary interventions. For me, it was different. I did not work on the questions at all because there was someone else doing it, and I worked mostly on the other things. So yeah, Anna, could you please move to the next slide? Okay, life at lab. So this is something that we realized over the course of the entire year, that there are three areas in which you really gain your skills, and three areas where you will actually be able to navigate the ecosystem much better after doing the fellowship. So the first is the political system. Uh, for people who have graduated in the discipline of law, law is a very limited space for us because it's just a text. It might have rules. You interpret them and you argue in courts. Or you have a set of regulations that are given by regulators, and then according to that, you shape a particular corporate deal. But when you actually enter the fellowship, you realize that the entire ecosystem is much more complex, much more interconnected, and there are parts of which are just not accessible to people in general. So your idea about how a law is made in the parliament, that becomes sharper than any other opportunity. You understand the executive system, you understand what are the rules, regulations, why is it that a certain thing can be done by the parliament, what are the limitations on the parliament, what are the different ministries or departments that are working in different areas. So there is an entire list of allocation of business that comes from the president's secretariat that decides which ministry is going to do what kind of work. And to have knowledge of that, I feel is one of the most um, instrumental things that you can work in the fellowship. And finally, you also understand what is the role that political actors play. And by political actors, I don't mean just the parliamentarians, but their entire office, everyone who's there, uh, every non-profit organization that lobbies with different parliamentarians to ask questions, or every kind of person who comes to your office to ask your MP to help them in some or the other way. This entire web of actors is something that becomes very crucial for you to understand. Second is the research, wherein you understand that research is not just limited to looking at journal articles. You realize that there needs to be a greater amount of diversity. And that diversity is something that you bring in from a lot of sources. You can bring in from the reports that are tabled in the parliaments. You can bring it from earlier instances of what has happened in the parliament, what previous governments did. So a knowledge of the political history of India is something that you learn on the go. And I would suggest that if you decide to do the fellowship, it is also something that you should read in advance. Besides that, your networking becomes really strong during the fellowship. You already are a group of 50, 55 people, extremely diverse. You know people in your MP's office. Through your MP's office, you know several other people. You meet a lot of big shots during the events that are happening in Delhi, in seminars, in conferences. And it's a great chance to talk to people, not just to help you in terms of um, doing new things later or to reach them out for favor, but also because it definitely gives you a clearer and a bigger outlook of what you want to do later in life. So I think for that, and that's something that I would say about most of us in the cohort, is that we had greater clarity in terms of what we wanted to do through this networking that happened during the session. That's it on my end. Anna, over to you.
Uh, okay, so just to maybe address a couple of things, again, mostly in relation to what happens within an MP's office. Like I said earlier, an MP's office is extremely diverse. Different people have different experiences with their MP. So you will, and of course, there are the more famous MPs who have LAMP fellows. There are the less famous MPs who have LAMP fellows. And I think something I realized through the course of the fellowship is that the less famous your MP is, the more likely it is that they have time for you. Because if they are famous, if they hold a certain position in their party, that means that they also have a lot more responsibilities. You're just one other person, seeking their time out of the probably 50 people each day who want their time. And they have to divide their time between what they need to do in parliament. They need to divide their time between what is happening within their own party, for instance, if there are divisions, if there are issues, that stuff they have to take care of. They also probably have to meet with ministers for like various concerns that they have at their local constituency level or at the state level. And so all of that play, and they also have to meet the hundreds of people who want to meet them. So one part of like my life while I was working with an MP was every morning I would brief her, and then my next role was basically taking pictures of everybody who was there to meet her. And this was stuff that would go on to social media, her social media, but also the social media of like the various NGOs, the organizations who come to meet her, and that is also definitely an aspect of the work of your work, that you filter through the people who are coming in, find out what their requests are, find out what is relevant for your MP, what is relevant, and what the MP can do for that person. So this is, and all of this also eats both into your time as well as your MP's time. So the whole idea of the mentorship that you get from an MP, it can vary a lot. So some MPs might be there for you through the course of your fellowship simply because they need you more than another MP does. I would still say that, even if you get allocated to an office where your MP is not able to give you the kind of attention that you, I don't know, were hoping for, there is still a lot to learn at the office, right? And I feel like your resources then is not just your MP, it is all of the staff at your office. I feel like I learned so much more about like the political system and just how my MP goes through her day-to-day life and the people she interacts with and how things get done by interacting with her secretary, her personal secretary, the person who coordinates all of her schedules and things like that. And yeah, so I would say like this is definitely not something that might have been great for the people who were there during COVID, there for the fellowship through COVID. But if you have the opportunity to actually be in the office of an MP, then there's a lot more that you learn from all of the people who surround her, all of the staff who work with your MP, rather than your MP themselves. And also, of course, like the people who come to interact with your MP, they have a lot of demands. So you learn what sort of things matter for your MP over the others. You learn about these organizations and what their interests are and whether that aligns with your own interests. So this is all things you can take away from the fellowship and from your time in an MP's office, even if, for instance, your MP does not pay attention to you like you sort of expected them to. Yeah, so again, while they say that your work is limited to legislation, it is clearly not that, right? Like one thing and this is also situational. So depending on where you are and at what point of time, you might have a more interesting or a less interesting experience with the exact same MP. So for instance, I was lucky enough to be at the MP's office exactly when a very controversial, very dramatic election was taking place. So I was able to witness a lot of the coalition forming and non-forming, and a lot of the breakups and the divisions that were taking place, the interactions between different parties when they were creating that. I was able to do some interesting drafting that mixed in different agendas of seemingly conflicting agendas together to bring something together, which was very interesting. I was also one of the very interesting things I was able to do was set up a press conference, and that's not something I've ever had to do before. So you realize that yeah, dealing with like 50 to like 60 journalists just cramming all around your face, it's actually quite intimidating, and it's actually quite a lot to take in and to control and sort of have an engagement with. But yeah, so the sort of experience you have is just very, very diverse. There's a lot that goes into the experience of being with an MP, and I don't know, again, with every MP it's going to be very different. So just to talk about what happens outside of the sessions, so you realize that a parliament session is usually around the time when is around 1 month, right? So it will be for like between June and July, between July and August for a month, then again between November and December for less than a month, and then a slightly long budget session usually. So that means that out of the 10 months that you're there as a fellow, you're spending almost six months outside of the session. And when the session is not taking place, your MP might not even be in Delhi. Your MP might be elsewhere. Your MP might be in their constituency. They might be outside the country. You don't. So because of course they have a lot on their plate, and Parliament is just one aspect of what they do. So what do you do outside the session? There's quite a lot. So one aspect, of course, is preparing for the next session. You usually have to sort of file submissions. You have to submit if you already have a list of things that might be on the agenda for the next session, you prepare for it in terms of the bills that might be discussed. You file questions in areas that might be of interest for your MP. You also prepare private member bills. So private member bills are usually one way in which an MP can sort of make their individual voice known in certain areas. So the problem with private member bills, of course, is that it is very difficult to sort of achieve that consensus to get a private member bill passed, which means it usually needs to get co-opted by the majority party in order for it to be passed. And once it gets co-opted, of course, it can sort of be transformed a bit and might not be exactly your vision. But the agenda here is to get your private member bill noticed. And one instance of a LAM fellow who actually got a private member bill notice was when Tiruchi Siva from the Rajya Sabha drafted a private member bill on the protection of transgender rights. And of course, then the BJP adopted it. The bill came out in a substantially modified form. But there you see the effect of a private member bill sort of moving into the mainstream, really. And then you have various committee-related assignments. So usually your MP will be a part of a parliamentary committee. This might be, there are a list of committees. So there might be a committee on defense, a committee on home affairs. So when you do that, what happens is, yeah, so you need to do the background research for what is taking place at committee meetings, which take place outside of the parliamentary sessions, and figure out questions for people who might be providing evidence or providing testimony, so that your MP is prepared for each of these meetings. There are also a series of very interesting PRS workshops that take place. So you know, these are they're thematic. So what happens is the workshop will be a 2-day workshop on the education sector, the state of the education sector. Similarly, another workshop on healthcare, another workshop on technology regulation and internet governance. And you get to participate in these workshops. You get to meet the key policy actors who are active in this region in India. And it's a great way to network. It's a great way to meet the kind of people that you hope to be working with in the specific areas that you're interested in, and interact with them, establish a connection, and maybe, I don't know, that could lead to something better at a later point of time. And of course, this gives you a lot of time. And if you're fortunate enough to be in Delhi while the session is while the LAM fellowship is taking place, it means you have access to so many events happening everywhere in Delhi, and you can attend these seminars, you can attend these conferences. And again, it's a great opportunity to network. The other thing that was quite popular during my time were constituency visits. So you can arrange with your MP to visit their constituency when the parliament is not in session. I was lucky enough to visit the constituency. You can see the sort of development works that your MP is trying to bring in. You can also just visit a part of India that you probably would not it would not usually fit into your travel agenda at any other point of time. So in that sense, it is definitely something interesting that you can do in the course of your fellowship, if COVID permits, of course. I think, is there anything I need to cover? I don't think so. So I'll just hand it over back to Mallik again.
All right. So, because this is aimed at most of you who will probably apply for the fellowship next year, so we just thought of listing down a few attributes that interviewers might be interested in when you are appearing for the interview, or even when you are writing your SOP. So the first thing is your flexibility, and this flexibility has to be in terms of your working hours, because it really depends on what time your MP wants you to be available for them. There are people who expect jobs to be 9 to 5, but then when you're assisting one person, then you just have to accommodate and adapt to their lifestyle. If if your MP is someone who wants you to come early in the morning at 7:30 or 8 and brief them about the news that's happening around, so be it. There might be an MP who would require you to work till 10, 11 at times. And these are just things that you have to be ready for. Uh, Flexibility in terms of your ideology. You might be a left liberal person who gets posted with the national spokesperson of BJP, and no one can stop that from happening. But once uh, you are there in the capacity of not not exactly a conscious citizen, but you are there uh, in the capacity of someone who's there to assist the MP. So your work has to be tailored accordingly. There are also times when you find yourself in a fix because your beliefs are um, in a conflict with what your MP wants to do. You can try to negotiate the difference, but if it does not happen, you can't really do anything about it. You have to eventually work along with that. There will be times when the MP wants to do a certain thing, but will not be able to do it because they have to toe the party line. So these are just like some realities that you have to deal with. And of course, your working style. There are some MPs who require you to write full-fledged speeches for them, which they will read out in the parliament. On the other hand, there are also MPs who will just ask you to list down the ideas on a piece of paper, and then they will articulate their own speeches. So you have to be flexible in terms of what is the work product that you're giving to them. Some of them find it easier to read very long passages. A lot of them just require you to give them bullet points. Some of them might even require you a more in-depth analysis of statistics. The second thing is self-drive, which is important because there is no one set of things that you have to do, no one way of doing the things. So you always have the flexibility to step out and choose more unconventional sources of information. And that is something where your self-drive really comes in. There are a lot of libraries in Delhi. There's Nehru Memorial Library where a lot of us used to go, and the collection of manuscripts and books there is really good. You also have the National Archives. So it is entirely your self-drive that determines how you are trying to access information that will be relevant for the work that you're doing for your MP or even for your own improvement. Secondly, your accountability is something that will be really on stake because as a person who's assisting a parliamentarian, you have to be accountable for your own work. You have to be absolutely sure of what you're writing in any document that you're giving to the MP, because an MP cannot stand on the floor of the parliament and be embarrassed about a misquoted fact. So these are the things that you have to be absolutely sure about when you're doing. And thirdly, extensive reading. This I cannot emphasize anymore because the amount of reading that the fellowship takes, if you want to do well, if you want to be of any service to the MP, is absolutely intense. You start off your day with reading newspapers, and you are always reading something or the other. There's almost no break from that. But then I think after 5 years of law, that just becomes a part of life. That shouldn't really be a problem. Next, uh, your soft skills in terms of how the system operates, because the system is not just you sending something to the Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha Secretariat and then that document getting processed. It's also about calling up people, asking them why these documents have not moved, um, eliciting information from them, talking to people who come to your MP's office to meet them, ensuring that um, things in the office are going in a smooth manner, if that is your role to play there. Secondly, your humility is something that you really learn from this entire process, and you also realize that only a humble person can be in that position and be able to not have any kind of ego battles with the other people in the office. And stress management, because there are times which are extremely stressful. It is effectively like a law firm where, there's that one transaction cycle when you're really, really, really busted. Then there's this other lean time. Uh, and finally, there's innovation. So the kind of work that you do and how you present it in terms of structure, in terms of size, and how you're articulating it, it requires a lot of creativity and innovation. How you do it, it's up to you. I think these are just hollow words when I just say it, but when you're right there doing it for and tailoring all of it for one particular person, then you get a better idea. There were a few questions relating to the two topics that I discussed, and I'll just address those questions. Um, this is something related to flexibility of time. What is the ideal workday like? And I'll just club it with the question on what are the work hours and what is the work-life balance. So this is a very there's absolutely no answer for that because it depends on your MP. It depends on the time of the year. It depends on what's happening in the country. If I'm sorry, if there are eventful things happening around, then there's very little space for you to do any work related to the parliament. If there's an election coming up in any of the states, and if your MP is someone who's instrumental in those elections in terms of campaigning, then again your experience will be different. But while we were at it, I remember the monsoon session was absolutely grilling, and it was more tiring and more demanding than even the work that I did in the firm. I used to wake up very late, out of bed, reading really dense bills almost every day. There is a new motor vehicles bill, you have a consumer protection bill, and these bills are absolutely displacing the existing legal framework in those areas. So the amount of work that was required was really intense. But then outside the session, you can't say. If your MP requires you to work, there will be times when it will be very difficult, but otherwise you will have enough space to do things that you want to do, to attend events that are happening in Delhi, not just related to law and policy, but everything nice and beautiful that happens here. And of course, you'll have the time to party with people. So if that's your concern, please don't worry. Uh, all right, Anna, could you please move to the next slide? So what lies after the fellowship? This is so the kind of things that I've seen people do after the fellowship is absolutely diverse. I have seen people go for their higher studies, not simply in public policy, but in a diverse set of areas. I've seen people join think tanks. A lot of them are doing good governance associate programs, and these are happening in different states. There's one in Arunachal Pradesh, one in Haryana. So two of our colleagues are working there. The kind of things that you do can range entirely from a very corporate setup to something that is um, core law, such as transaction or litigation, or you can choose something interdisciplinary. One of the plus points of the fellowship is that your brain really opens up and you have an idea of the wide variety of things that are available to you. For me, that was a sea change because when you're in college, there's not much you know about these areas. But eventually, after talking to people here within the cohort and meeting people during the events that happened in Delhi, you really get an idea of a lot of things that you can do outside the conventional realm. What you learn from the fellowship is Firstly, of course, about how the system works. You learn about what are the different things that you can do in order to affect a particular thing. You also understand what are the constraints. So tomorrow, if you have to work on a particular issue, you will know what are the problems that come up because of the design problems, what are the issues that come up because of psychology, what are the problems that come up because of economics, and what are the problems that come up because of just how people behave in a political ecosystem. The amount of learning is immense. Uh, but something that you always have to be careful about is that you should not be complacent, because there is always a drive that's coming from different directions, not just PRS, not just the MP, even your colleagues, and it is equally critical to capture from all of those sources to distill the ideas and to really figure out what you want to do. So if I have to count the number of things that people have done after LAMP, it is quite diverse. But once you get into the fellowship, then a lot of things start making sense to you. If you decide to choose a particular thing after college, which is quite niche, you want to step into policy for a year and you want to go back to it. I've seen people do that also, and that's not a problem. One very interesting thing that people do is to join policy teams in the various corporate law firms. Of course, the kind of work that they do there is more restricted. It is related to the regulators, for example, the Competition Commission, or in relation to software technology. Uh, but in general, this is generally the landscape out there. The the avenues available are way more diverse than you could think of now, and I'm pretty sure in 2 to 3 years it will become even more diverse. So yeah, that is it. Anna, should we just go through the questions and see if we have missed anything?
Yeah, just like I wanted to add maybe a couple of things.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? Yeah, so the one thing that I think we sort of have taken for granted from NALSAR is the fact that, a lot of things come handed to us on a plateau. So you have the ICC and the RCC sort of coming our way, and, where jobs are coming to us, where internships are coming to us. But you will find that at least with the LAM fellowship, a lot of what you end up doing is uh, it's on you. Like, you're the one driving everything that's going to happen to you in the future. So you will have to make sure that you're doing the right amount of networking. You will have to make sure that where it is that you might want to land up at the end of the fellowship, and sort of push yourself in that direction. Find the connections that you want. Have the meetings that you want. So in that sense, it's a lot. I think when with the ICC and the RCC, we sort of end up being like, okay, this is there for me, so I shall take it. But when it comes to the fellowship, it's a lot more about you sort of making an active decision to go in a certain direction. So that's definitely something. And of course, it's like again, it is a platter of some sort. You have a wide variety of options to choose from, but it's on you to ultimately sort of make that choice. And just to sort of go back a couple of slides, and this is just something that I thought was very interesting, but just when it comes to the research output that you give, I just want to say that when we come from law school, we have this very sort of legal way of looking at things. We want to do a legal analysis of text, and that's why we limit ourselves. But when it comes to the research you do as a LAM fellow, it can get very exciting and also very difficult, because we don't deal with numbers, or we don't want to deal with numbers, but you have to deal with data a lot. You will have to deal with budget documents. You will have to deal with what has been taken into account, what has not been taken into account this year, what has gone off the list when it comes to a budget, and why. And you have to sort of do that sort of analysis. That can be a little challenging in the beginning, but definitely quite rewarding. But apart from data and law, there's just so much that we do which is also very unrelated. So I know of a friend who because her MP was quite good at rhetoric when it came to speeches that they made in parliament, was required to actually go through the Bhagavad Gita to find quotes that they could use during their speeches. And of course, when it comes to regional MPs, they also want you to, put the sort of spotlight on their regional legends, they're literary legends. So you will end up going into Tamil literature or like Tagore, and then trying to find stuff that might be of meaning to your MP and something that your MP can sort of highlight. But also, you also end up doing something along the lines of you go through other debates. So you go through what other people have said in the past, and you use that for your MP to build their own arguments. And different MPs have different research styles, and they have different speech styles. So for instance, some MPs would like some MPs in the opposition, my MP for instance, really enjoyed sort of catching the Treasury bench in a light, for instance, or catching the Treasury bench doing something that the opposition bench had done much better at an earlier point or something when they were in power, and had sort of been disputed at that point of time. But you see that the Treasury bench is doing exactly that at this point of time. So it's quite exhilarating to sort of find these little things that an opposition party might have, an other party, the other side might have done wrong, and sort of like bring that out in Parliament on behalf of your MP. But so it's just the diversity when it comes to the research as well is very interesting. But yes, we can go to the questions now.
Yeah, so one of the questions. Hello.
There's one question on how frequently you interact with your MP. Do you visit your MP's constituency? It again depends on the MP that you're working for. Anna got the chance to visit. A lot of people did not. Then meeting the MP, at least while the parliament is in session, you will get to meet the MP almost every day. Even when the parliament is not in session, they will be in their constituencies, but they will keep coming down for these parliamentary committee meetings or any other work that they might have with the ministries in Delhi. So at that level, the MP will be in the office at these times, but then again, how much interaction you at a personal level have with the MP is going to be determined by a lot of things. What is the value that the MP sees in you? Who are the other people in the office? How much is the MP dependent on you for their work? So these are the things that determine how frequently you're going to meet the parliamentarian that you're working for.
Okay, I can take a couple of questions. So is every MP assigned a fellow, or only the MPs who need a fellow? Every MP is not assigned a fellow. There are more than 600. I don't know what is the exact number of MPs that are there both in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha put together. 700? Okay, yeah. So only 50 LAM fellows exist. 50 to 60 LAM fellows will be there. So PRS definitely does a level of filtration when it comes to the members of parliament that get allocated LAM fellows. And they say that this is on the basis of their participation metrics in parliament. But it might also be, it can be anything really. They could be a new MP who's really in need of that sort of assistance, and that's why they might have been allocated someone. But somebody else might have been allocated because they've been performing really well, and might have maybe made an individual request saying, can I get an MP? Can I get a LAM fellow? So yes, not every MP gets assigned a fellow. There's another question on whether MPs involve you in election campaign strategy, if the time you were there coincided with elections. So no. So with PRS is basically your employer for the course of this program. You have this dual relationship between PRS and your MP. And it can sometimes be quite in conflict. For instance, like PRS might want you to attend something that PRS is doing, while your MP might want you there at the MP's office. So you will find that you have to sort of deal with that conflict between PRS and your MP at certain points of time. But PRS is effectively a non-partisan, non-governmental organization. And you as a representative of PRS are not allowed to participate in election campaigns and election campaign strategy. That does not, however, mean that you are sort of wholly excluded from the work that's happening. It can just so happen that that's the work that's happening in your MP's office, and because you are present in that office, you end up sort of looped in, but it is just ideally not work that is associated with the LAM fellow, and also work that you have the right to say no to. There are no chances of working with a minister under the LAM fellowship. That's completely excluded. And again, this ties back to PRS being non-partisan, non-governmental, and the sort of conflict of interest that would arise if a LAM fellow working with PRS starts working with a minister in terms of whose influence and whose opinion starts influencing whom. So that's not something that happens. So I think that's it. What kind of effect does being a LAM scholar have on our future education and employment opportunities? So nothing is really out of consideration when it comes to employment opportunities, I think. And like Aayush explained, everything is on the table, everything is an opportunity. And for sure, I think as LAM fellows, people do recognize that, the act of working with a member of parliament is not something that everybody has access to. It is definitely something that has provided you with something that gives you an edge over other candidates in terms of the networks you have, in terms of the knowledge you've built. And I think both when it comes to higher education and employment, there is some sort of value that is attached to the act of working with member of parliament. What is the right time to apply for a fellowship? So the timeline for the fellowship is every year between January and December and January is when the applications open. You can apply in your final year of university. That's an option that's open to you. I worked for 1 year, both of us, Aayush and I, both of us worked for 1 year before we did the fellowship. But you have that time constraint. So you usually graduate from law school when you're 23. You can only do the fellowship until you're 25. So you can choose which period of time between 23 and 25 you want to do the fellowship. I think that's it, right?
I would say the earlier the better.
Are there any other questions, or are we done?
I think that's all the questions that we had.
There was one question about my experience in the SCI. I think that's like a
Yeah.
more personal query. I feel like I should take this offline. Utkarsh, what do you suggest?
I think I don't really have a clue on that. I think that's all the questions we had from both the document as well as the chat box.
If there are any other questions, people can just send us messages or like emails. I'm open to that.
Yeah, sure. We'll share email IDs with them. Cool.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, Mr. Mallik and Ms. Thomas, thank you so much for taking out the time for this and for so skillfully integrating all the questions that I'd sent in the document. It was a very bulky document, I know, but that really made the entire presentation very comprehensive and substantive. And I'm hopeful that this will go a long way into helping the potential applicants whenever they apply. And I'm also thankful to the attendees for showing up actually and for sending the questions well in advance. I wish all of you a very productive weekend.
Bye.
Thank you, Utkarsh. Bye.